When the grid dies, your car becomes one of two things: a coffin or a fortress on wheels. Most people will be trapped in the first 10 minutes of collapse not because they lack supplies but because they never understood the machine sitting in their own driveway. This is the story of the vehicles that survived and the 15 brutal rules written in the wreckage of the ones that didn't. By the time you finish this, you'll never look at your own car the same way again. There was a moment, quiet and unnoticed, when humanity stopped seeing the car as a survival tool and started seeing it as a couch with wheels. Comfort replaced readiness. Bluetooth replaced backup plans. Heated seats replaced the instinct to check oil pressure before a long drive. And when the first real disaster hit, a grid failure, a flood, a war that crossed a border overnight, millions of vehicles became useless steel boxes on a frozen highway, monuments to a world that forgot how fragile convenience really is. Engineers and survivalists who studied these collapses noticed the same pattern again and again. It wasn't the disaster that killed people. It was the 15-minute gap between danger and decision. In that gap, untrained drivers panicked, fumbling for phones that had no signal, screaming into radios that received no answer. Trained ones moved with a strange, eerie calm, as if they had lived this exact moment 100 times before in their heads, while everyone else was still scrolling. And the difference between the two was never luck. It was knowledge prepared long before the sirens ever sounded, knowledge stored not in apps or cloud servers but in muscle memory, in habit, in the quiet discipline of checking things nobody else bothered to check. Picture the highway at the moment of collapse, thousands of cars, engines running, going nowhere, fuel gauges dropping in real time, phones with no signal, screens glowing uselessly in the dark. Drivers who never once practiced what to do when the world stopped cooperating, now learning the hardest lesson of their lives in front of their own children. This is where Rule 1 reveals itself: never let your fuel tank fall below half, because in collapse, gas stations don't reopen, they get looted in under an hour. The smart ones knew this instinctively. The unprepared learned it standing in line behind 100 other desperate strangers, watching the pumps run dry one by one. Rule 2 follows close behind. A vehicle is only as reliable as its weakest hidden part: belts, hoses, batteries, the unglamorous components nobody checks until they fail at the worst possible second. A snapped belt on a normal Tuesday is an inconvenience. The same snapped belt during an evacuation is a verdict. And Rule 3 is the one most preppers ignore until it's too late. No 3 ways out of every place you park, because the road you arrived on is rarely the road that lets you leave. Bridges collapse, crowds surge, police barricades appear where none existed an hour earlier. The driver who memorized only one exit becomes a statistic, the one who memorized 3 becomes a survivor. The survivors of real-world collapse, earthquakes, blackouts, sudden evacuations all described the same chilling realization: the car wasn't the problem. The owner's ignorance of the car was. The machine was always capable of more than its driver ever asked of it. What separates a prepper's vehicle from an ordinary one isn't armor or weapons, it's a system, quiet and disciplined, built long before disaster ever knocks. It lives in small habits repeated so often they stop feeling like effort and start feeling like instinct, like breathing, like survival itself. Rule 4: carry a physical map, because GPS dies with the grid and paper never needs a satellite to tell the truth. Rule 5: keep a go bag bolted to logic, not emotion: water, tools, first aid, never sentimental weight that slows an escape when seconds decide everything. Rule 6 teaches drivers to treat their battery like a heartbeat, testing it monthly, because a dead battery during evacuation is a death sentence disguised as an inconvenience. Rule 7 says never trust a single spare tire, flats during chaos rarely come alone, and a second blowout with no backup turns a vehicle into a tomb on the roadside. Rule 8 reveals something deeper. A prepper studies terrain like a chess player studies an opponent, mapping flood zones, choke points, and dead ends long before the crisis forces a decision under pressure. They know which roads flood first, which bridges bottleneck, which towns turn hostile when supplies run thin. By Rule 9 through 12, fuel siphoning ethics, manual transmission advantages, off-grid charging, and convoy communication, the story stops being about machines and becomes something more unsettling. Survival is never random. It's rehearsed again and again in the mind of someone who refused to be surprised. Here is the twist hidden inside every survival manual ever written. The vehicle was never the hero of this story. It was always just a tool, indifferent to who held the keys, waiting for a mind sharp enough to use it properly. Rules 13, 14, and 15: emotional control under pressure, decision-making with incomplete information, and the discipline to stop before exhaustion turns into a fatal mistake, have nothing to do with engines at all. They live entirely inside the human skull in the half-second between fear and action. The machine only obeys. It cannot panic, cannot freeze, cannot forget the way home. Only the driver can do that. Only the driver can stare at a fuel gauge and convince himself there's more time than there actually is. This is the quiet horror beneath every collapse story. Disaster doesn't expose weak vehicles. It exposes unprepared minds sitting behind a steering wheel they never truly understood in a world that no longer forgives hesitation. In the end, the road doesn't care how expensive your car is, it only asks one question. Did you prepare the mind that drives it before the world gave you no choice but to find out the hard way?